In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a grand fish supper turns deadly when Elias Thorne collapses, poisoned, whispering of poisoned waters. Miss Marple, the sharp-eyed sleuth, unravels a web of greed, betrayal, and biblical secrets. Was it the fish, a cursed family legacy, or a hidden killer? Join her as she exposes the truth, saving her niece and restoring faith in this thrilling mystery. Chapter 1. The Village Feast and a Sudden Shadow. In the cozy village of St. Mary Mead, where flowers bloomed bright and gossip buzzed like bees, the air sparkled with excitement. The harvest festival was coming, a big party where everyone ate, laughed, and thanked God for good crops. This year, the talk was all about the grand fish supper at the vicarage, hosted by Mr. Elias Thorne, a rich man who loved his church. Miss Jane Marple, a sweet old lady with sharp eyes, sat on her porch, knitting a soft scarf. Her needles clicked as she listened to neighbors chatter about the feast. The village hummed with stories like the ones in her Bible about miracles and fish. Miss Marple's niece, Mabel, a kind woman with a quick smile, stopped by to chat. "Aunt Jane, you're coming to the supper, right?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Mabel wore a green dress that matched the garden hedges. Miss Marple nodded, her gray hair neat under a straw hat. "Of course, dear. I wouldn't miss Mr. Thorne's big night," she said, her voice calm but curious. She'd heard whispers about Elias Thorne, how he bragged about a miracle catch of fish for the feast. Fishermen from the coast had brought baskets of shiny cod and haddock, more than anyone expected. Some called it a gift from heaven, like the story of Jesus feeding thousands with just a few fish. The vicarage, a stone house with ivy climbing its walls, glowed with lantern light as evening fell. Villagers in their Sunday best filled the long dining hall. The tables were covered with white cloths, set with plates of steaming fish, golden potatoes, and fresh bread. The smell of lemon and herbs floated in the air, making mouths water. Miss Marple sat near the vicar, Mr. Clement, a gentleman with round glasses. Mabel was across from her, next to Elias Thorne, who stood tall in a dark suit, his silver hair shining like a crown. He raised a glass of water. Not wine, because he never drank alcohol. "To our village," he cheered, "and to the miracle of the fish, a sign of God's plenty." Everyone clapped, but Miss Marple noticed small things. Mabel's smile was tight, like she was hiding a worry. She'd argued with Thorne last week about money, something about her late husband's share of the family business. Thorne's brother, Reverend Silas, sat at the far end, his face sour as old milk. He was a preacher, but not the friendly kind. Then there was Jack Hale, a fisherman with rough hands and a hard stare, watching Thorne like a hawk. Miss Marple tucked these details away, like threads in her knitting bag. The feast began, and forks clinked as people ate. The fish was tender, flavored with butter and parsley. Children giggled, and old Mrs. Price told stories of harvests long ago. Miss Marple took small bites, her eyes moving from face to face. She loved St. Mary Mead, but she knew villages hid secrets, like stones under a pretty stream. She remembered a time when poison pen letters caused trouble here, and she felt a tiny shiver. Something wasn't right. Halfway through the meal, a loud gasp broke the chatter. Elias Thorne stood, his face pale as chalk. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Water splashed, catching the candlelight. "The waters," he choked, his voice a rasp. "Poisoned waters!" Foam bubbled at his lips, and his eyes rolled back. He fell, crashing onto the table, sending plates flying. Women screamed, and men jumped up. Mabel froze, her hands shaking. The vicar rushed to Thorne, feeling for a pulse, but his face went grim. "He's gone," Mr. Clement whispered. The room turned to chaos. Mrs. Price wailed, saying it was a curse. Jack Hale backed away, his eyes wide. Silas stood still, his lips moving like he was praying. Miss Marple stayed calm, her knitting now in her lap. She watched Mabel, who looked sick with fear. "It wasn't me," Mabel cried, as neighbors stared. Miss Marple patted her hand. "Hush, dear, we'll sort this out," she said softly, but her mind was racing. Poison, she thought. Not just any poison. Thorne's words about poisoned waters stuck in her head like a clue from one of her mystery books. By morning, the village was a storm of talk. Inspector Craddock, a tall man with a serious face, arrived with policemen. They sealed the vicarage and took the fish away to test it. Whispers spread that Mabel was in trouble. Someone found a tiny bottle of arsenic in her handbag, hidden under a handkerchief. "It's for rats in my garden," Mabel sobbed, but the inspector's eyes were cold. "You argued with Mr. Thorne about money, didn't you?" he asked. Mabel nodded, tears falling, "But I'd never heard him." Miss Marple sat in her cottage, sipping tea, thinking hard. She knew Mabel wasn't a killer. The arsenic was too obvious, like a trap set to point fingers. She remembered Thorne's words about the fish miracle, how he tied it to his family's old fishing trade. The Thornes had been rich once, owning boats and nets, but bad deals left them struggling, except for Elias, who'd built his wealth back up. Was someone jealous? Miss Marple's needles clicked faster as she thought. Of the Bible story. Jesus made fish multiply, but here, fish brought death. Or did they? She walked to the vicarage, her stick tapping the path. The cook, Mrs. Bates, was outside wringing her hands. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's awful. Those fish were perfect, I swear, but I saw black spots on the haddock, like marks of bad luck." Miss Marple raised her eyebrow. "Black spots?" she asked. Mrs. Bates nodded, "Like St. Peter's thumbprint from the old tale." Miss Marple smiled faintly. She knew the story, St. Peter catching a fish with a coin in its mouth. But black spots could mean something else, maybe a clue about the poison. Back at home, Miss Marple opened her Bible to John 6, the story of the loaves and fishes. "A miracle of plenty," she murmured. Thorne had called his fish a miracle, but why? She thought of the guests. Silas, who needed money for his failing church, Jack Hale, who'd lost his boat because of Thorne's deals, and Emily, the vicar's shy assistant, who blushed when Thorne spoke to her. Then there was the stranger Mrs. Bates mentioned, a man who brought extra fish late at night. Who was he? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Villages were like puzzles, and she loved finding the missing pieces. As the sun set, casting gold over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat by her window. The village looked peaceful, but she felt a storm coming. Thorne's death wasn't an accident. Someone had turned a feast into a trap, using poison to hide their hatred. She thought of Mabel, locked in a cell, scared and alone. "Don't worry, dear," Miss Marple whispered, her needle still. "I'll find the truth." She closed her Bible, her mind full of fish, miracles, and secrets, ready to unravel the mystery before the harvest festival ended in more sorrow.
Chapter 2. Whispers of Poison and Biblical Echoes. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead, but the village buzzed with fear, not light. Elias Thorne's death at the fish supper hung over the cobblestone streets like a dark cloud. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles quiet for once. She sipped tea, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of neighbors passing by her window. Gossip spread faster than butter on hot toast. Thorn was poisoned, and Mabel, her sweet niece, was locked up, blamed for it. Miss Marple's heart ached, but her mind was clear. She knew Mabel was no killer. The truth hid somewhere in the village, tangled like yarn. Outside, folks gathered in knots, whispering. Old Mrs. Price, her bonnet flapping, swore it was a curse from the sea. Young Tommy, the baker's boy, said he heard Thorn choke out poisoned waters before he fell. Miss Marple tucked that phrase away like a button in her sewing box. It reminded her of something holy, maybe from the Bible. She'd figure it out. For now, she needed facts. She put on her best hat, a soft blue one, grabbed her stick, and walked to the vicarage to see Mr. Clement, the vicar. The vicarage smelled of wax and worry. Mr. Clement, his glasses foggy, sat at his desk, papers scattered. "Oh, Miss Marple," he said, his voice shaky, "it's a terrible thing. Poor Elias. And Mabel in jail." Miss Marple sat across from him, her hands folded. "Tell me about the supper, Mr. Clement," she said gently. "What did Elias say about his fish?" The vicar rubbed his eyes. He was so proud, kept talking about a miracle, like Jesus feeding the 5,000 with fish and bread. Said his family's fishing trade was blessed again, bringing in heaps of cod and haddock. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning. The Bible story from John 6 was about plenty from little, a gift from God. But Thorn's miracle ended in death. "Did he say anything odd?" she asked. The vicar frowned. "Well, he mentioned his ancestors, fishermen named after saints. Peter, Andrew, James. He said their nets were full again, like in the old days." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Thorn's words weren't just boasts, they were clues, pointing to his family's past. She thanked the vicar and stepped into the kitchen, where Mrs. Bates, the cook, was scrubbing pots. Her hands shook, and her apron was damp with tears. "Miss Marple, I swear the fish was fresh," she cried. "I checked every piece myself." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "I'm sure you did, dear. But tell me about those black spots you saw." Mrs. Bates wiped her face. "On the haddock, yes, like little marks, dark as coal. I thought of St. Peter's fish, the one with his thumbprint in the Bible story. But they weren't bad, just strange." Miss Marple's mind clicked like her knitting needles. St. Peter's fish, the tilapia with dark spots, was a tale of faith, a fish with a coin in its mouth to pay taxes. But spots on haddock, that wasn't natural. Maybe poison left a mark, or maybe someone wanted it to look that way. "Mrs. Bates," she said, "who brought the extra fish that night?" The cook's eyes widened. "A man, late, after dark, rough-looking, with a cap pulled low. Dropped off 2 baskets and left. I didn't see his face." Back in the village square, Miss Marple heard more talk. Inspector Craddock had news. The fish tested positive for a poison called pilocarpine. Rare and sneaky, like something from a doctor's bag. It made your mouth foam and your heart stop. Worse, they found arsenic in Mabel's handbag, enough to make her look guilty. Miss Marple visited Mabel at the tiny police station, a gray building by the post office. Mabel's face was pale, her green eyes red from crying. "Aunt Jane, I didn't do it," she said. "The arsenic was for rats, I swear. Elias was family." Miss Marple patted her hand. "I know, dear. Someone's playing a mean trick." She thought of the arsenic. Too easy. Like a signpost saying, "Blame Mabel." Poisoners were cleverer than that, she knew from old cases. Like the time Mrs. Green got sick from bad tea, and it wasn't the tea at all, but a drop in her sugar bowl. This felt the same, staged to hide the real killer. Walking home, Miss Marple passed the church, its steeple tall against the sky. She stepped inside, the cool air smelling of wood and candles. A Bible lay open on a table, turned to John 6, and Jesus took the loaves and fishes and gave thanks. She read the words, her mind on Thorn's miracle. Was he hiding something? His fishing business had failed years ago, but lately he'd gotten rich again. How and why? Poison him at a feast with everyone watching?
She thought of the suspects. Reverend Silas, Thorne's brother, who preached about sin but lived in a shabby cottage. Jack Hale, the fisherman who glared at Thorne like he owed him money. Emily, the vicar's assistant, who blushed too much around Elias. And the stranger with the fish. Where did he fit in? Miss Marple's fingers itched for her knitting, but her brain was busy. The poisoned waters Thorne gasped about. Maybe it wasn't the fish, but something else. His water glass, maybe. It broke when he fell, splashing everywhere. At home, Miss Marple lit a lamp and sat by her fire. The village was quiet now, but secrets bubbled under its calm surface. She remembered a case years ago when a poisoned cake pointed to the wrong person, but a tiny clue, a spilled cup, showed the truth. She'd talk to Craddock tomorrow, ask about that glass. For now, she opened her notebook, writing down fish, poison, miracle, and St. Peter. The Bible story was key, she felt it. Someone used Thorne's faith against him, turning a feast into a trap. As stars blinked outside, Miss Marple whispered a prayer for Mabel. "We'll find the truth, dear," she said to the empty room. Her eyes shone, sharp as ever. The fish supper was no miracle. It was a puzzle, and she'd solve it, piece by piece, before another shadow fell on St. Mary Mead.
Chapter 3. Threads of Inheritance and Hidden Grudges. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft gray blanket. Miss Jane Marple sat at her small breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming beside her. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind too busy for needles. Elias Thorne's death was no accident, and her niece Mabel sat in a cold cell, blamed for a crime she didn't do. The village buzzed with whispers, poison, fish, miracles. But Miss Marple knew the truth was tangled in secrets, like a knot in her yarn. She needed to pull the right thread. She put on her coat and hat, her stick tapping as she walked to the lawyer's office, a tidy brick building near the village square. Mr. Petherbridge, the lawyer, was a thin man with a nervous smile. He welcomed her, offering a chair. "Miss Marple, I'm so sorry about Elias," he said, shuffling papers. "And poor Mabel, what a mess." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. "Mr. Petherbridge, may I see Mr. Thorne's will?" she asked. "It might help Mabel." The lawyer hesitated, then pulled out a thick document. The will was clear. Elias left most of his money to the church for new pews and a youth program. But there was a note, a codicil added last month. It said his wealth would be divided like a miracle among family, including Mabel's late husband, who was Elias's nephew. Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Divided how?" she asked. Mr. Petherbridge shrugged. Elias was vague, said it was like the Bible where fish and bread fed thousands. He talked about his fishing business, how it was thriving again. Miss Marple's mind clicked. The fishing business, Thorne's pride, tied to his talk of miracles. But why poison him now, just when he was rich again? She thanked the lawyer and stepped outside, where the village was waking up. Children ran past, laughing, but the adults whispered, glancing at the police station where Mabel waited. Miss Marple thought of the suspects, Reverend Silas Thorne, Elias's brother, who preached hellfire but lived poorly. Jack Hale, the fisherman who lost his boat. And Emily, the vicar's assistant, who acted shy but knew too much. Each had a reason to hate Elias. She walked to the church, its stone walls cooled in the morning light. Inside she found old letters in the parish records, yellowed and dusty. They told of the Thorne family, fishermen for generations, named after Bible saints, Peter, Andrew, James. One letter from 1890 mentioned a curse on the seas when their boat sank and the family lost everything. Elias had rebuilt the business, but at what cost? Miss Marple tucked the letter in her bag, her mind on Thorne's dying words, poisoned waters. Was it a clue to the family's past? At the village tea shop, Miss Marple sipped tea and listened. Mrs. Price, her bonnet still flapping, told a tale of the Thornes' cursed nets, how their fish rotted overnight years ago. Elias fixed it all, she said, but some say he cheated folks to do it.
Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Jack Hale. She'd seen him at the feast, his eyes hard as stones. Had Elias cheated him? And what about Silas, who needed money for his crumbling church? She visited Mabel next, at the police station. Mabel's face was pale, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Aunt Jane, they think I poisoned him," she cried. "Because of the arsenic and because I argued with Elias about Tom's share?" Tom was her late husband, Elias's nephew. Miss Marple patted her arm. "Don't worry, dear, the truth always comes out, like a stitch in time." But her mind was busy. The arsenic in Mabel's bag was too neat, like a trap. Someone wanted her blamed. Miss Marple walked to the vicarage, where Emily, the vicar's assistant, was sweeping the porch. The girl was young, with soft curls and nervous eyes. "Miss Marple, it's awful," she said, her voice small. "Mr. Thorne was so kind." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Did you notice anything odd at the supper, Emily?" Her glow blushed, looking away. "Well, I saw Jack Hale near the kitchen before we ate. He was carrying a basket like the one with the extra fish." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Jack Hale again. And the stranger Mrs. Bates mentioned, who brought fish late at night. Could it be Jack? She thought of the poison, pilocarpine, found in the fish. It wasn't common, but it mimicked eye drops, something a doctor might know about. Silas, Elias's brother, used to be a doctor before he turned to preaching. Did he know poisons? Miss Marple thanked Emily and headed home, her stick tapping faster now. In her cottage, she sat by the fire, her Bible open to John 6. The miracle of the fishes was about faith, but also trust. Jesus trusted the disciples to share the food. Elias trusted his village, but someone betrayed him. She thought of the codicil, the miraculous division of wealth. Was it money that drove the killer? Or something deeper, like a grudge from the past? The poisoned waters could mean the fish, the glass, or even the family's cursed history. Miss Marple wrote in her notebook, Silas, money troubles, doctor passed, Jack, lost boat, angry. Emily knows more than she says. She added, poisoned waters, and underlined it. The village looked quiet outside, with smoke curling from chimneys, but she knew better. Secrets were like weeds, growing in the dark. She'd talk to Inspector Craddock tomorrow, ask about the broken glass and the fish tests. For now, she prayed for Mabel, her heart steady, but her mind racing. The fish supper was no miracle. It was a web of lies, and she'd untangle it before another soul got hurt.
Chapter 4. The Fishmonger's Tale and Village Secrets. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, casting light on the village's neat cottages, but shadows lingered in Miss Jane Marple's mind. Elias Thorne's death at the fish supper was a puzzle, and her niece Mabel, locked up for a crime she didn't commit, needed her help. Miss Marple's knitting sat untouched, her hands busy with a cup of tea as she thought. The poison pilocarpine found in the fish and the arsenic in Mabel's bag were too tidy, like a story written to fool everyone. She needed answers, and the village fishmonger might have them. She put on her gray coat and flowered hat, her stick tapping as she walked to Mr. Finch's shop, a small place by the river. The air smelled of salt and scales, and baskets of cod and haddock gleamed under the counter. Mr. Finch, a stout man with red cheeks, was wiping his hands on an apron. "Miss Marple, what brings you here?" he asked, his smile fading when he saw her serious face. "Mr. Finch," she said, "tell me about the fish for Mr. Thorne's supper. Anything odd?" Mr. Finch scratched his head. "Well, most came from the usual fishermen, but Elias ordered extra, haddock, special-like. Said it was for his miracle feast like in the Bible." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Extra fish? From who?" Mr. Finch leaned closer, voice low. "A stranger brought 2 baskets the night before. Rough fellow, cap pulled down. But here's the thing. I got a call later from a doctor's office
asking for pilocarpine-laced bait fish. Said it was for a sick dog. I sent some, but Miss Marple's heart skipped. Pilocarpine, the poison that killed Elias. Bait fish for a dog. That was no mistake. She thanked Mr. Finch and walked to the church, her mind buzzing like bees. The Bible story of the fishes, where Jesus fed thousands, kept circling her thoughts. Elias called his fish a miracle, but someone turned it into a trap. She needed to know more about the stranger and those black spots Mrs. Bates saw on the haddock. Inside the church, the air was cool, smelling of wax and old wood. Miss Marple found a small silver fish pendant in a glass case, a relic from the catacomb saints, tied to early Christians. It gleamed like a clue. The vicar, Mr. Clement, had said Elias loved this pendant, calling it a sign of faith. Did it mean something to the killer? She sat in a pew, her eyes on the open Bible, John 6, the miracle of the fishes. Plenty from little, she murmured. Elias's wealth had grown, but so had his enemies. Back in the village, she passed the tea shop, where gossip boiled. Mrs. Price, her bonnet wobbling, was telling everyone about the cursed thorns. Elias's family lost their boats years ago. Some say he stole from kin to get rich again. Miss Marple listened, sipping tea. She thought of Reverend Silas, Elias's brother, who preached about sin but lived in a shabby cottage. Was he jealous? Then there was Jack Hale, the fisherman who lost everything, and Emily, the vicar's assistant, who saw Jack near the kitchen. Miss Marple visited Emily at the vicarage, where the girl was polishing silver. "Emily, dear," Miss Marple said kindly, "you mentioned Jack Hale with a basket. Anything else?" Emily's cheeks turned pink. I shouldn't say, but I heard Elias and Jack arguing last week. Jack said Elias owed him money from a bad deal with the fishing boats." Miss Marple nodded. Jack had a grudge and access to fish, but pilocarpine wasn't a fisherman's tool, it was medical, like something Silas, the former doctor, might know. As she walked home, a boy ran up, breathless. "Miss Marple, someone left this at your gate." He handed her a note, scrawled in black ink. "Stop prying, old lady, or you'll be next." Miss Marple's lips tightened. She'd seen notes like this before, poison pen letters meant to scare. They only made her more curious. She tucked the note in her pocket, thinking of a case years ago when a cruel letter hit a murderer. This note meant the killer was watching, afraid she was close. At her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her Bible open. The fish pendant, the black spots, the pilocarpine, all pieces of a puzzle. She remembered Elias's words, poisoned waters. Not the fish, maybe, but his water glass, shattered on the floor. Had someone slipped poison there, using the fish as a distraction? She wrote in her notebook, Jack, angry, near kitchen. Silas, doctor, knows poisons. Emily, hiding something. Stranger, fish delivery. The pendant nagged at her. Was it a symbol or something more? The village glowed under the evening sky, but Miss Marple felt a chill. Secrets were like fish in a net, wriggling to escape. She thought of Mabel, scared in her cell, and whispered, "Hold on, dear." The poison wasn't just in the fish. It was in someone's heart, twisted by greed or hate. She'd talk to Inspector Craddock tomorrow, ask about the glass and that note. For now, her eyes gleamed, sharp as a needle. The fish supper was a trap, and she'd find the one who set it before St. Mary Mead lost another soul.
Chapter 5. Miracles and Deceptions Unraveled. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, but Miss Jane Marple felt a chill in her bones. Elias Thorne's death at the fish supper was a dark knot, and her niece, Mabel, still locked in a cell, was counting on her to untie it. The village whispered of poison and curses, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes saw past the gossip. The pillow carpine in the fish, the arsenic in Mabel's bag, the threatening note left at her gate, all were threads in a tangled web. She sipped tea in her cottage, her knitting idle, her mind racing like a river. Today she'd pull those threads at the village prayer meeting. The church hall buzzed with nervous chatter as villagers gathered, their faces tight with worry. Miss Marple sat near the front, her blue hat neat, her hands folded. Reverend Silas Thorne stood at the pulpit, his voice loud as he spoke of faith and sin. His eyes, dark like coal, flicked over the crowd. Jack Hale slouched in a back pew, his fisherman's cap low. Emily, the vicar's assistant, fidgeted with her hymn book, her cheeks pink. Miss Marple watched them all, her mind on the Bible story Elias loved, the miracle of the fishes, where Jesus turned little into plenty. She stood to speak, her voice soft but clear. The Bible tells us of miracles, like the loaves and fishes, where faith made enough for all. But greed can twist blessings into poison. The room went quiet, eyes on her. She glanced at Silas, who gripped the pulpit. Mr. Thorne spoke of a miracle too. His fish supper was meant to show God's plenty, but someone turned it to death. Whispers rippled. Jack shifted, his jaw tight. Emily looked down, her hands shaking. Miss Marple sat, letting her words sink in. She'd planted a seed, hoping the guilty would slip. After the meeting, she met Inspector Craddock outside, his face grim under his hat. "Miss Marple, we tested the fish again," he said. "Pillow carpine was there, but faint. Odd thing, the strongest dose was in Elias's teacup, not the food." Miss Marple's heart jumped. The teacup, hidden among broken glass from his fall. "And the water glass?" she asked. Craddock nodded. "Smashed, but we're testing it. Could be where the poison was." Her mind spun. The fish was a trick, a loud distraction like a dropped plate. The real poison was in the teacup, slipped in when eyes were on the feast. She thought of Elias's words, poisoned waters. Not the sea, but his own cup. Pillow carpine mimicked eye drops, something a doctor like Silas might have. She needed more. She walked to the vicarage, where Mrs. Bates, the cook, was peeling potatoes. "Mrs. Bates," she said, "that teacup Elias used, did anyone touch it before the supper?" Mrs. Bates frowned. "Well, Emily set the table, and Reverend Silas was in the kitchen, fetching water. Said he wanted to bless it, like in church." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Silas? Blessing water? Or hiding poison? She thanked Mrs. Bates and headed to Jack Hale's cottage by the river. Jack was outside, mending nets, his hands rough as bark. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you were seen near the kitchen before the supper, with a fish basket." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I delivered fish, that's all. Elias owed me money, ruined my boat business with his deals, but I didn't kill him." His voice was loud, but his hands shook. Miss Marple nodded kindly. "Of course, dear. Just helping Mabel." She left, thinking. Jack was angry, but his story felt thin like old cloth. He knew fish, not poisons. Silas, though, knew both. Back home, Miss Marple opened her Bible to John 6. The fish miracle was about trust. Jesus trusted his disciples to share. Elias trusted his village, but someone betrayed him. She thought of the silver fish pendant in the church, a symbol of faith. Had Silas taken it, as Emily hinted? And those black spots on the haddock? Mrs. Bates thought they were St. Peter's mark, but tests showed they were natural, not poison. The fish was a false clue, meant to mislead. She wrote in her notebook, teacup, poison, Silas, doctor and kitchen, Jack, angry, but no poison knowledge. Emily, saw too much. Then she paused, circling, poisoned waters. Elias's dying words weren't about fish, they were about his cup, maybe a garbled cry for the antidote he tried to take. Pilocarpine was an antidote to atropine, another poison.
Had he known he was poisoned and reached for the wrong cure? A knock at her door startled her. Emily stood there, twisting her scarf. "Miss Marple," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. I saw Silas with a small bottle in the kitchen, before the supper. He said it was medicine, but I'm scared." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You did right, dear." Her mind raced. Silas, with his doctor's past, had the means. And motive, maybe Elias's wealth, meant for the church, was too tempting. As night fell, St. Mary Mead crinkled with lights, but Miss Marple felt the weight of secrets. The prayer meeting had stirred the pot, and Emily's words were a new thread. The poison wasn't in the fish, it was in the teacup, a quiet betrayal. She'd tell Craddock about Silas tomorrow, push for tests on that glass. For now, she prayed for Mabel, her heart steady. The fish supper was no miracle, it was a lie, and she was close to the truth, like a needle through cloth.
Chapter 6. The Finger of Suspicion Points to Faith. The evening shadows stretched long over St. Mary Mead, but Miss Jane Marple's mind burned bright. Elias Thorne's death at the fish supper was a puzzle, and her niece Mabel, trapped in a cell, needed her to solve it. The poison, pilocarpine, not in the fish but in Elias's teacup, pointed to a careful killer. Emily's whisper about Reverend Silas Thorne with a bottle in the kitchen was a new clue, sharp as a pin. Miss Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting still, her tea cold. The village looked calm, but secrets churned like a stormy sea. She'd tug the right thread today. She put on her best coat and hat, her stick tapping as she walked to the vicarage. The air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke. Inspector Craddock was there, his notebook full of scribbles. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "we tested the glass shards, traces of pilocarpine, strong ones. The teacup was the real weapon, not the fish." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming. "And Reverend Silas?" she asked. "He was in the kitchen, blessing water," Mrs. Bates said. Craddock's brow furrowed. "We'll talk to him. He's been odd, dodging questions." Miss Marple thought of Silas, Elias's brother, a former doctor turned preacher, with a sour face and a failing church. Pilocarpine was medical, something he'd know. She remembered the silver fish pendant in the church, a symbol of faith. Emily said Silas admired it, maybe too much. Was he stealing to save his church? Miss Marple headed to Silas's cottage, a shabby place with peeling paint. He opened the door, his eyes narrow. "Miss Marple, what do you want?" he snapped, his voice rough as gravel. Just a chat, Reverend, about Elias and his miracle." Silas stiffened, letting her in. The room was bare, with a Bible open on a table. Elias is a fool. His miracle was just money, not faith. He bragged about fish, but he cheated family to get rich. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Like Tom's husband, Tom?" Silas's jaw tightened. Tom was weak. Elias cut him out of the business. I told Elias to make it right, but he laughed. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Silas had motive, anger, maybe jealousy. "You were a doctor once," she said. "Did you ever use pilocarpine?" Silas's face paled. "That's old history," he muttered. "I'm a man of God now." He said he was at his church during the supper, praying alone, but Miss Marple remembered Emily's words, Silas in the kitchen with a bottle. She thanked him and left, her mind buzzing. At the church, she found Emily dusting pews, her hands shaky. "Emily, dear, you saw Silas with a bottle. Tell me more." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "It was small, like medicine. He was by the sink, pouring something. I thought it was for his eyes. He's got glaucoma. But when Elias died, I got scared." Miss Marple patted her arm. "You're brave, dear." "Glaucoma. Eye drops. Pilocarpine was used for that, but too much could kill. Silas had the means and the chance." Miss Marple met Craddock at the vicarage, where church bells rang, echoing in the dusk. "Inspector," she said, "Silas was a doctor. He knows pilocarpine. He was in the kitchen, and Emily saw him with a bottle. Elias's will gave money to the church, but Silas might have wanted it sooner." Craddock nodded, his face grim. "We checked his alibi. Nobody saw him at his church during the supper. And the fish pendant, it's gone from the case."
Her mind raced. The pendant, a symbol of faith, stolen. Elias's poisoned waters, not the fish, but his teacup, laced with Silas's poison. She thought of the Bible, John 6, where Peter's faith wavered but was restored. Silas preached faith, but his heart was greedy. She saw it now. Elias planned to expose Silas for stealing church funds, using his miracle sermon to hint at it. Silas struck first, poisoning the teacup, blaming the fish. Craddock called Silas to the vicarage. The preacher arrived, his face like stone. "What's this about?" he demanded. Craddock held up a report. "Pilocarpine in the teacup, Reverend, and your prints on a kitchen bottle." Silas's eyes darted, like a trapped fish. "I blessed the water," he shouted. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm. "You poured poison, Silas. Elias knew you took church money. You killed him to hide it, using his feast to point at Mabel." Silas lunged for the door, but Craddock grabbed him. "You're coming with us," he said. Silas slumped, his fight gone. The bells rang again, a solemn sound like a call to truth. Miss Marple thought of Peter, who denied Jesus but found forgiveness. Silas would face justice, not grace. She'd tell Mabel soon, but first she needed the pendant. It tied Silas to the crime. The village twinkled under the stars, but Miss Marple felt lighter. The poison was in the teacup, the motive in Silas's greed. She'd check with Emily about that pendant tomorrow, and Craddock would search Silas's cottage. For now, she walked home, her stick steady, her heart full. The fish supper was no miracle, it was a betrayal. But truth had won, like light through a dark net.
Chapter 7. The Confession and the Twist of Justice. The morning light crept over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft pinks, but Miss Jane Marple felt a quiet triumph. Elias Thorne's death at the fish supper was nearly solved, and her niece Mabel, still in a cell, would soon be free. Reverend Silas Thorne, caught in his lies, sat in the vicarage parlor, his face gray as ash. Inspector Craddock stood tall, his notebook ready, while Miss Jane Marple sat calmly, her hands folded, her eyes sharp as pins. The church bells outside rang low, like a call to truth. The puzzle was almost complete, but one piece, the silver fish pendant, remained. Craddock spoke first, his voice firm. "Reverend Silas, we found pilocarpine in Elias's teacup, not the fish. Your prints were on a bottle in the kitchen. Emily saw you there, pouring something." Silas's hands shook, his preacher's robe crumpled. "I told you it was medicine," he snapped, but his eyes darted to the door. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft. "Silas, you were a doctor. You knew pilocarpine could kill. Elias was going to tell everyone you stole church money. You poisoned him to keep your secret." Silas's face twisted, like a cloth wrung tight. "You've got no proof," he shouted. Craddock held up a small bag. "We searched your cottage, found this." Inside was the silver fish pendant, stolen from the church. Miss Marple's heart jumped. The pendant, a symbol of faith, tied Silas to his greed. "You took it to sell," she said. "Elias knew, didn't he? His miracle sermon was a warning. He'd expose you at the supper." Silas slumped, his fight gone. "All right," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Elias was my brother, but he lorded his money over me. The church was failing, and he gave me scraps. I took a little from the funds, just to keep going. He found out, said he'd tell the village. I couldn't let him." His eyes filled with tears. "I put pilocarpine in his teacup, just a drop. Thought it looked like a heart attack. The fish, the feast, it was perfect to blame Mabel, with her arsenic and her fights about the will." Miss Marple nodded, her face sad but steady. Silas had turned faith into a weapon, like Judas betraying Jesus. She thought of the Bible, John 6, where the fish miracle fed thousands through trust. Silas's greed poisoned that trust, and his brother paid the price. Craddock snapped handcuffs on Silas, who didn't resist. "You'll face court," Craddock said. "Mabel is free." Miss Marple's heart lifted,
but she felt a pang for Silas, a man lost to his own darkness. She walked to the police station, her stick tapping the cobblestones. Mabel ran to her, free at last, her green eyes bright with tears. "Aunt Jane, you did it!" she cried, hugging her tight. Miss Marple patted her back. "There, dear, it's over." Mabel wiped her face. "But why blame me?" Miss Marple sighed. "Silas knew you argued with Elias about Tom's share. The arsenic in your bag was his trick, planted to point fingers. He didn't know I'd see through it." They sat in the station's small room, sipping weak tea. Miss Marple told Mabel about the teacup, the pendant, and Silas's confession. He used the fish supper to hide his crime, like a magician's trick. The black spots on the haddock, the poisoned waters Elias gasped, they were distractions. The real poison was quiet, in his cup. Mabel shook her head. Elias loved that Bible story, the fish miracle. Silas twisted it. Miss Marple nodded. "Greed can twist anything, dear. Like Peter, who doubted but was forgiven. Silas had a chance to choose right. He didn't." She thought of the village, now free of its shadow. The arsenic in Mabel's bag was for rats, just as she said, and tests proved it wasn't used on Elias. The will would be sorted, with Mabel getting her fair share for Tom's memory to help the church's youth program. As they left, the village square was busy with folks preparing for a memorial service for Elias. Mrs. Price, her bonnet still wobbly, hugged Mabel, apologizing for her gossip. Jack Hale nodded from afar, his face softer. He'd been angry, but not a killer. Emily, at the vicarage, smiled shyly, glad she'd told the truth. Miss Marple felt the pieces settle, like a finished scarf. The threatening note at her gate was Silas's last try to scare her, but it only made her dig deeper. At home, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her Bible open to John 6. The fish miracle was about sharing, not hoarding. Elias wanted to share his wealth, but Silas couldn't bear it. She whispered a prayer for both brothers, one gone, one lost to his sins. The village would heal, and Mabel was safe. Tomorrow, the memorial would bring peace, with hymns and kind words. For now, Miss Marple's heart was full, her mind at rest. The fish supper's poison was gone, and truth had woven St. Mary Mead back together.
Chapter 8. A Satisfying Harvest of Truth. The sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, its light brushing the village's cottages with hope. Miss Jane Marple sat on her porch, her knitting needles clicking softly, a warm scarf growing in her lap. Elias Thorne's death at the fish supper was solved, and her niece Mabel was free, cleared of the poison that stained her name. Reverend Silas, the killer, was in custody, his greed laid bare like an unraveled knot. The village felt lighter, as if a storm had passed, leaving clear skies. Miss Marple sipped tea, her eyes soft but bright, ready to see the story's end. The Harvest Festival was back on, set for noon in the churchyard. Villagers bustled, hanging flowers and setting tables with bread and jam. No fish this time. Miss Marple walked to the church, her stick steady, her blue hat neat. Mabel met her there, her green dress bright, her smile wide. "Aunt Jane, it's like a new day," she said, hugging her. Miss Marple patted her cheek. "It is, dear. Truth always brings light." They joined crowd where Mr. Clement, the vicar, stood ready to lead a memorial for Elias. The service was simple, with hymns that floated like birds. Mr. Clement spoke of Elias's love for the church, how his will gave money for pews and children's classes. Mabel, now named in the will, promised to use her share, Tom's rightful part, for the youth program, to teach faith and kindness. Miss Marple nodded, her heart full. The silver fish pendant, stolen by Silas, but now back in its church case, gleamed under the stained glass light, a quiet symbol of trust restored. After the service, villagers gathered in the yard, sharing stories. Mrs. Price, her bonnet still wobbling, apologized again to Mabel for her gossip. "I should have known better," she said, offering a jar of homemade jam. Jack Hale stood nearby, his fisherman's cap in hand. He nodded to Miss Marple. "You saved Mabel, ma'am. I was mad at Elias, but I'd never hurt him." Miss Marple smiled. "I know, dear. Anger's loud, but truth is quiet." Emily, the vicar's assistant, helped serve tea. Her shy smile brighter now that she'd told the truth about Silas. Miss Marple sat on a bench, watching the village knit itself back together. She thought of the Bible, John 6, the miracle of the fishes, plenty from little shared with love. Elias wanted his feast to echo that, but Silas's greed turned it to poison. The pilocarpine in the teacup, the arsenic planted to frame Mabel, the black spots on the haddock, all were tricks, like shadows in a storm. Silas's poisoned waters were his own lies, drowning his faith. Miss Marple sighed, her needles clicking. "Like Peter," she murmured, "he stumbled but could have risen. He chose wrong." Mabel joined her, carrying a plate of scones. "Aunt Jane, you're a wonder," she said. "How'd you know it was Silas?" Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Villages are like my knitting, dear. Pull one thread and the pattern shows. Silas's greed was the loose stitch. His doctor passed, the bottle, the pendant, it all fit." Mabel grinned. "You're coming to my house next week, right? The kids want to see you." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes twinkling. "Wouldn't miss it." As the festival ended, villagers raised glasses of cider, toasting Elias and the truth. The church bells rang, their sound clear and warm, like a promise kept. Miss Marple walked home, her stick tapping, her heart at peace. The fish supper's curse was gone, turned to a miracle of justice, like the Bible's fish feeding thousands. She sat by her fire, her Bible open, and whispered a prayer for St. Mary Mead. The puzzle was solved, the web untangled. Truth had won, and the village was whole again, ready for new days and kinder harvests.